So all the airmen across the country, with the exception of the members assigned at NATO headquarters and the airmen working as special operations forces there, were assigned in one way or the other through our wing. And what was the day like? What did we do there in the wing? As a wing commander, I had 2 fly days in the Strike Eagle, and on the days I flew, that would eat up most of my time. Eat breakfast, brief, go fly, usually 6 hours, roughly in a mission, come back and debrief, and then go clean up after the day's activities and see what work was left. So 2 days a week I flew. 1 day a week I flew down to Kandahar, where we had a group that flew the MQ-9 and C-130s and ran the airfield at Kandahar. 1 day a week, the division commander, Jeff Schlosser, would give me his helicopter and crew, and they would fly me around the country to go visit our airmen that were in those small detachments of joint expeditionary taskings. And then on the other 3 days, I followed through with the battle rhythm of the 101st and RC East. We ran the wing with just a daily stand-up, which lasted somewhere between 15 and 30 minutes every day, 6 days a week, and a wing staff meeting that would be a more in-depth look at what was going on, and those were usually an hour and a half, and we did those once a week. We had a very small wing staff, and many of them were dual-hatted in positions on the JTF that was led by RC East. We were able to do that because we had 4 exceptional group commanders. Dave Blanks was the maintenance group commander. Patty Searcy was the mission support group commander. Tim Donk Strasburger was the operations group commander. And then our med group commanders rotated, and they were also dual-hatted in a joint role as a commander of Joint Task Force Medical for all of Afghanistan. So we shared responsibility with them, and they found it advantageous to belong to me sometimes and belong to the other command sometimes. We only had about 6 airmen that were there on 1-year tours. Me, those group commanders, the command chiefs. There were some there that were on 6-month tours. I think it got up to maybe 25 or 30. And everybody else was on a 90-day tour, which meant squadrons would come and go. And the airmen that worked in the other groups would come in as small groups from different bases and join together in teams. So over the 13 and a half months, I really had 5 wings there because they swapped out in big groups. 1 started, and then 4 more swap outs, and then handed that group off to Steve Quast. The airmen would show up. There'd be a day or 2 of cats and dogs living together where you didn't want to pay too close attention, but it usually only took about 48 hours for them to fall in, understand their work, just understand who their new boss and their chain was, and do great work. Their squadron commanders did a super job, both officers and NCOs, but we were able to run the wing with very little meeting time because our airmen were really focused on what they were doing, really dedicated, and we had a great group of leaders from around the Air Force. We did learn to do newcomers briefings, so every week I spoke to whatever airmen had arrived there over that week, or maybe some that couldn't make the last session and showed up. And we talked about the wing and what we were doing there and why it was important. We set our standards and expectations. We let them know what we were going to ask of them, and we found that to pay a great deal of benefit in helping people get off. And we called those our right start briefings. And then when our wing staff was trying to think about a slogan, they came up with the idea of, we have right start, let's talk about finishing strong. So right start, finish strong. And, if you've been around soldiers, if they meet each other outside when they salute, they say, all the way if they're in the 82nd Airborne, or they say air assault if they're 101st. And so we asked our airmen that we would meet each other and say, start right, and the response would be finish strong. And I'd forget I'd ask them to do that, and I'd meet great young airmen down the street that'd say start right, and I'd have to stutter a minute and think to say finish strong. We did a lot of construction as well. So we had a big civil engineering squadron, and we had Red Horse detachments, and we were constantly building new ramp space on the airfield and new facilities to support aircraft. And it seemed like every time we got a new piece of ramp poured, General North would send 2 or 4 more airplanes in there to take advantage of that space. We provided close air support one-on-one briefs to the Army maneuver units as they came into the country to let them know what we were doing, what we had learned, to give them some advice on the best use of our close air support assets. We experienced rocket attacks, not too many during that time frame, mostly young Taliban members that were coming to get their I Attacked Bagram Merit Badge. We had a detachment from the Office of Special Investigations, counter-intel guys that were very effective. They had their own security detail, and they were our best eyes and ears outside the base. Over the course of the 13 and a half months, unfortunately, many members of that 101st led ground force gave their lives, and a handful of our airmen. All the casualties we took were in our provincial reconstruction teams, our PRTs. They worked out in the communities in the different areas and did projects to try to help the locals with power or schools or hospitals. And the enemy made no distinction and would attack them because if they were successful in giving services to the population, it made the Taliban look bad. And when we did those ceremonies at Bagram, the tradition there since 9/11 was that everything stopped on the base and we did a fallen comrade ceremony. And we would descend on a C-17, we would empty all the cargo from it, we would clean up the back and make everything look uniform. The remains that had been prepared in the mortuary there, including by some of our airmen for mortuary affairs, would drive across the base. Everyone who was not doing something essential would turn out on the highway to pay their respects, and we'd do a ceremony and put them on the airplane, present coins and salute, and then start them back on the path to Dover in the United States through Ramstein. And there were many, many nights, often many, many nights in a row that we were up at 2 or 3 in the morning because that was the time the airplanes came through. And Secretary Gates had said that we had to get remains to Dover in 48 hours because that's what the morticians needed to be able to make our heroes presentable to their families. And then we also transferred wounded to the hospital at Ramstein where they would be treated initially. Some could return from there. Some would go on to the United States. And those were the wounded that we couldn't properly take care of there at Bagram, where we did a lot of stabilizing people and preparing them for that journey. We also had medical evacuation people assigned to the wing, mostly from the Air Force Reserve, great folks who would come over for a week or two and fly trips back and forth, taking wounded American heroes back and forth to Ramstein. So that was the rhythm for 13 and a half months, pretty much every day. I'd allow myself to sleep an extra hour on Fridays and to sleep an extra hour on Sundays. Our Sunday and the kind of Islamic Sunday. And there was a lot to do, but it was a great team. I did take a mid-tour leave for about 2 weeks and came back and was able to see both kids and Sarah for 2 weeks. And then I came back and about Christmas time, Sarah said, you haven't said anything about when you're coming home. And I said, well, do you want to talk about when I'm coming home? She said, yes. I said, well, General North has asked me to stay extra to try to move it from March closer to the summer. And I've told him that I could go 6 weeks extra and still get home for all the birthdays. And she said, well, I'm glad that we had this talk. And before we did, General North would say, hey, have you told Sarah you're going to extend yet? I go, nope. I'd say, when are you going to tell her? Not till I have to. How come? To keep me out of trouble as long as I can and keep you out of trouble as long as I can too. So we made that extension, but soon enough in April, Steve Quast was there for a change of command. General North took the flag for me and handed it to Steve Quast. I flew back with him to Al-Udeid. My good friend Mike Moeller was the wing commander there. Mike met me and fed me and got me to the gym and a shower and then took me to the airport. I flew home on Qatar Airlines. And just about 24 hours after I gave up the wing, I was standing outside the Dulles airport waiting for Sarah to come pick me up, wondering what had happened to all my best friends that were still in Afghanistan. So that's a brief look at 13 and a half months in Afghanistan. It was the experience of a lifetime. I want to encourage anybody who's watching to come record your experiences. You can give something short, you can give something long. We want to record this for your family, for your descendants to see, and for all Americans to be able to look back and look at the great work that airmen did across Afghanistan during our time there. So thanks for joining me.